Hello and welcome back to Movie Health Community, the internet's #1 source of health warnings at the movies. As always, please keep in mind that nothing produced by Movie Health Community is medical advice, nor has any of it been reviewed by any medical professionals. Tonight we are talking about Madam Web, the new Sony and Marvel collaboration. But before we talk about whether this movie is any good, let's talk about if this movie is safe for photosensitive audiences. The answer is no! Madam Web is not safe at all for photosensitive audiences. It has very frequent and very strong and very unpredictable strobe effects. Some examples include during scenes where the main character sees visions, there are almost always strobe effects. There is a childbirth scene near the beginning of this movie where there are very extreme strobe effects. There's a scene where a subway starts moving where the lights start flickering really horribly. There's a glitching effect in the opening Columbia Pictures title card for the production company. There are strobe lights on an ambulance at night, and the final action scene takes place in a background filled with fireworks. For flashing lights, we are giving Madam Web a 10 out of 10. Extreme caution, extreme danger if you are photosensitive. Definitely one to avoid if that's the case. In terms of motion, this movie uses more rolling shots, sideways rolls, than I've ever seen in a single movie. It works as kind of a creative option, but it does get pretty disorienting when it's done so frequently. The final action scene has some peril at extreme heights, and there are a few scenes where there are high-speed drives or otherwise high-speed action. And then the only trigger warning I have for this movie is that early in the movie there is some very severe violence against a pregnant woman. Now, is this movie any good? I'm a little late bringing you guys this review, so I've had a chance to see how some of the other people are reviewing it, that this is historically one of the worst superhero movies ever made, according to the popular consensus. I'm not gonna shit on this movie, at least not as much as everybody else seems to be. This is not a good movie, but it's not quite as terrible as all that. One of the biggest praises I have for this movie is with the fact that it takes place in 2003, it actually feels like something that would have been made in 2003. Where people are having fun exploring these new ideas and putting these special powers on screen. I just recently rewatched a Columbia Pictures masterpiece from a similar time, Men in Black, and I have very clear memories of Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2, also from Columbia Pictures around that time. This movie does feel like something that would have been made by the same studio at that time, with a lot of overlapping crew at that time. And it feels like if this had come out in 2003, it would have probably had a reputation kind of like the Daredevil movie with Ben Affleck, where the general consensus is not that it's good, but it would have some of its fans and it would have a bit of a unusual cult following. All the weird kids would say they're fans of it, or that it was something that they liked. One specific thing that I did love seeing was seeing a couple in bed after doing adult activities. The lady was at least in her 40s. That is not something we see a lot of when we get random people in bed with a major character. Typically, if the major character is a man, the woman will be like in her early 20s or have some kind of weird age gap. This was not the case with this one scene. That was something that was very refreshing to see. And yes, she was quite attractive. What this movie really feels like is that there would have been a teenager who was a fan of the Marvel comics in 2002 when the first Spider-Man movie came out, like teenager or young child, and that with a mild familiarity with the Madam Web character, this person would have written a screenplay in like 2 days and never once submitted this to anybody to polish the screenplay or to clean up the dialogue or to make the flow go better. The script feels very amateur, and one very specific example is people getting frustrated with something and then just all of a sudden going, "Oh, I can't take this, I'm leaving." Complete with the "ugh." That is something that is a very beginner's level writing thing. Like, that's something that I only ever see in screenplays by people that have never actually written a screenplay. And by people who have never written a screenplay, I mean me. I have written stuff like that when I first started attempting to write new stories that could be translated into short or feature films. I have been guilty of this. But with the studio backing that Columbia Pictures has, especially with their superhero movies, they really need to be able to have a polished quality about their dialogue. Because this movie had some of the roughest dialogue I've heard on the big screen in a very long time. Probably since the A Wrinkle in Time movie by Disney. Another moment that stood out to me that just said the studio didn't actually care how this movie turned out was one little moment that probably no one else is going to be thinking about anymore, but Dakota Johnson starts pouring a carton of milk, and she starts tilting it very slowly, and a cat walks in front of where the milk carton is, and then we hear the pouring of the milk. And that feels like a patch where they gave her an empty carton as a prop and just threw the cat in later to fix it. It's the epitome of "we'll fix it in post," which is a phrase that no editor wants to hear, because not everything is going to be able to be fixed in post, or if you adopt that mentality, it's not going to turn out good in editing. Again, I'm speaking from practical experience on this one. This movie also did the only thing that leaves me with any complaints about the Joker movie, which is that it added in a background story that we didn't need about a character that's much more popular than the character that we're seeing. In the terms of the Joker movie, we actually saw a young Bruce Wayne, and at the end of the movie, we did get, once again, the murder of the Waynes. In this movie, we get the pending birth and subsequent birth at some point in the movie of a character that is unnamed, but it is ridiculously obvious who this character is supposed to be. I will respect them a little bit for having that particular scene, leaving me with questions about how old Spider-Man is in the MCU, which in the year 2024, he would only be 16. He would be 21 if he didn't get Thanos, but he would be 16, which means he would have been 13 during the events of Captain America Civil War. I'm going to talk about a spoiler at the end of this one, but until then, I am going to give Madam Web a D-. Thank you so much to our readers on Tumblr and Facebook, and as always, an extra special thanks to our patrons over on our Patreon page whose names are scrolling across the screen like credits right now. We have added a new perk to the $5 tier of our Patreon page. If you want a movie reviewed and evaluated in this YouTube format, you are now able to request that particular movie through the $5 tier of our Patreon page. I will sit down to the movie with fresh eyes. I will put it on. I will even rent it if the rental is under $5. And I will make a detailed video about whether this movie is safe for photosensitive audiences and whether or not I like the movie and what I like or dislike about it. Be sure to leave a like on this video, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when we post new videos. And as always, stay safe at the movies. Okay, the spoiler I want to talk about is Madam Web in a wheelchair at the end or not? We see this one scene where she's in like the world's tallest quadriplegic wheelchair. And then in the very next scene, she's out actioning around with the other 3 Spider-Women. So I am really confused on that. Is she a quadriplegic? Is she a paraplegic? Is she in the wheelchair for no reason? I get that she's blind. I didn't catch the moment of the movie where that happened, but I accept that whatever happened during the climax left her blind, but we never see what led to her being in a wheelchair, and in those last literally like 2 or 3 minutes of the movie, there is no consistency around that wheelchair. So I don't know. I just wanted to get that out there in this spoiler section of the movie.